Humanism was a 14th and 15th century intellectual movement that revolved around the idea of the individual achieving their full potential. It grew out of the ideas of the Italian poet and philosopher Francesco Petrarca, and it rapidly spread to academics, essayists, and civil leaders throughout Italy. It defined humans as emotional, rational, and essentially well-meaning. It was a positive and enthusiastic movement, much at odds with the philosophies of fear and damnation of the Christian Church for those who would not conform or repent, and over time it grew to question some of the fundamental doctrines of the Church. It became the model for the expansion of Renaissance humanism throughout Europe, advocating a revival of the forgotten values of classical antiquity. A return to the higher cultural aspirations of Greek and Roman ideals and their inspiration for all walks of life, from literature to art to Studia Humanitatis. In their view, the ancient world was the peak of human aspirations and attainments, while the years before and after the ancient period were considered the Dark Ages.
If you like the maps we create on our channel, make sure to check out Daniel Hazenbo's class called Fantasy Cities in Photoshop on Skillshare. His 15-lesson class will take you through the entire creation process, and in a couple of hours you'll learn how to create detailed cities for your map. Daniel also has excellent classes on how to create great-looking world maps, so you should definitely check out those as well. But if becoming a digital artist is not for you, Skillshare provides you with thousands of high-quality courses about every subject under the sun. From video editing, such as Dan Lu's in-depth course on color grading in filmmaking, to cool tricks to impress your friends, all the way to core competencies that you can build a career of. And the best part is that the first 1,000 of you to sign up using the link in the description below will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium, providing you with instant and unlimited access to the entire Skillshare platform. And after that, it's only $10 a month. Start exploring your creativity today on Skillshare. The great centers of humanism were Rome, Venice, Genoa, Florence, Mantua, Ferrara, Naples, and Urbino. From these centers, the new philosophy permeated the European landscape, encouraging a return to the study of the humanities. Humanists turned away from the Middle Ages' isolated scholasticism and science-based model and preferred studying history, poetry, literature, art, grammar, language, and morality. Renaissance humanists wanted a world of orators, philosophers, writers, and artists. They wanted citizens who could govern or be actively involved in their communities. These accomplished citizens would be completely literate and not just obtain employment, but pursue more things beyond the frugality of their immediate roles in society. They would seek knowledge, inspire others to question reality, seek answers beyond God and religion, and embrace learning. In their study of the ancients, early Renaissance humanists did not see themselves as being in conflict with Christianity. Instead, they encouraged an open-minded approach that saw the classics combined with Christian theology. The outcome was that humanism frequently celebrated Christianity within the arts, encouraging many artists to express themselves in a multitude of means, be it sculpting or painting, just to name a few. They celebrated artists like Filippo Brunelleschi, Lorenzo Ghiberti, and Donatello, especially for the classical and erotic statue of the biblical David with the head of Goliath. Humanism changed the status not only of art, but of artists. During the medieval period, art was a pursuit of the lower classes, practiced by craftsmen and servants. In stark contrast, Renaissance artists were intellectuals who used art as a medium of expression. Art became highly valued and sought after. It attracted great patrons like Cosimo de' Medici, whom we talked about in a previous video in this series. Furthermore, not all humanist art revered Christianity, and some even looked for more secular subjects. For humanists, the expression and capturing of the essence
were more significant than the subject matter. For example, Paolo Uccello created depth and captured light for his best-known series of works, The Battle of San Romano. He did not sleep as he waited nightly to catch the exact moment when the light changed. His obsession with linear perspective led him to try to grasp the vanishing point. Later, going into the 16th century, the discovery of oil paints further transformed painting and its expression. Among early humanists, there were major collectors of ancient manuscripts. Many were intellectuals who worked within the church and were members of holy orders like Petrarch, known as the father of humanism, or senior members of the church like Cardinal Vasilios Vassarion, a Byzantine Greek theologian who converted from Greek Orthodoxy to the Latin Church, who was considered for the papacy and was recognized by his contemporaries as one of the most learned scholars of the time. These learned scholars from the ranks of the church used their resources to expand ecclesiastical libraries. Others were lawyers, bureaucrats, poets, writers, and politicians, such as the Chancellor of Florence, Colocchio Salutati, who had access to book copying workshops and was able to amass a collection of 800 books. Through them, humanist education spread rapidly throughout Italy, and by the mid-15th century, many in the upper classes had received humanist educations, along with the traditional scholastic education. Finally, in the wake of the fall of Constantinople in the disastrous Fourth Crusade and the subsequent end of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, Greek scholars and intellectuals flooded into Italy, bringing along with them their knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman literature, language, and science. The core ambition of humanism was to create the ultimate human being. Among the essential qualities to achieve this status were physical excellence, intellectual distinction, and honorable behaviors in any situation. It was an ancient Greco-Roman ideal known as uomo universal, the universal man. If they successfully attained this goal, humans could transcend effortlessly into the afterlife with a perfect mind and body. Achieving this status relied on education, as humanists believed that considerable change occurred through expanding one's knowledge. The classics, mainly history and literature, provided moral understanding and instruction in human behavior. All citizens were encouraged to learn to read and write and to engage in civic life. They created a network of schools dedicated to humanist ideas and wrote academic books about education. They focused on creating articulate and persuasive individuals, skilled in written and spoken word, and capable of exerting pressure on others to live by the values of prudence and virtue. Renaissance humanism spread with attention to grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, and moral philosophy for the elite. Clergy of various denominations, politicians, and those in practice, including medicine and law, adopted its teachings. By the 16th century, its philosophy was prolific throughout Europe. Humanists saw education as the cornerstone of life. They endeavored to enhance the lives of individuals and communities through learning. Their approach merged Christianity and classical learning. Vittorino da Feltre founded one of the most famous humanist schools in 1423 in Mantua, a tiny Italian state. The Duke of Mantua had long wished to offer his children a humanist education, and the school was a tool to assist him in that task. The essence of Feltre's views were based on earlier classical authors like Cicero and Quintilian. The liberal studies program was the school's mainstay. Liberal arts were seen as the key to human freedom, allowing people to pursue their dreams and realize their full potential. Philosophy, history, rhetoric, letters, mathematics, poetry, music, and astronomy were among the liberal arts subjects that students were meant to learn. The school at Mantua was not focused just in the exercise of the mind, but also provided physical instruction based on the Greek concept of a sound mind. Archery, dance, hunting, and swimming were among the activities taught at the school. While education in humanist Europe was mostly accessible for children from the upper-class families, its ideology did include offering education to gifted and talented individuals from the poor lower class. Education was not generally provided to girls, although prevalent thinking encouraged them to pursue other subjects like dance, history, and an understanding of poetry. Isotta Nogarola, Cassandra Fedeli of Venice, and Laura Cereta were notorious exceptions who could overcome the prevalent female exclusion of the time, thanks to their rank and status, and were able to substantially impact their communities. Mannerism evolved from the painting of the early and high Renaissance as a response and rejection to the ideals of Renaissance art. Mannerist artists rebelled against such principles, creating a style and design that reacted to the harmonious purposes of the Renaissance masters. They created artificial and illogical arrangements in space, with distorted, often elongated figures. Their work held a sophistication and frequently succeeded in sending poignant messages that the High Renaissance failed to capture. Leading lights in the movement were Rosso Fiorentino, Parmigianino, Pontormo, Bronzino, and Giulio Romano. Many were pupils of Raphael and Michelangelo. To summarize, humanists rejected the functional view of education prevalent during the Middle Ages. They wanted a society with literate citizens, with an ease for the spoken word, and who were involved in community life. Humanism was based on the ideal of people achieving their full potential and grew around the ideas of Italian poet and intellectual Francesco Petrarch. It started as a literary movement that inspired a cultural change, re-establishing the value of classical Roman and Greek art. It culminated in the Renaissance. The early and high Renaissance produced great works of sculpture and art, evolving into Mannerism, which was characterized by asymmetrical and unnatural elegant figures. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe as a sacrifice to the algorithm. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.